Welcome to yet another special edition of Connect for Health, the webinar and podcast brought to you by Cigna Healthcare Middle East and Africa with a little bit of help from mentl. I'm Scott Armstrong. I created mentl as a platform for safe conversations about well-being and our mental health. And today's session is mainly for children and teens, but also parents and teachers are welcome to be part of the conversation too. If you are a young person, please, we're going to be asking questions. We're going to ask you polls. Get involved because this session is for you. But of course, parents and teachers, we want your insights and we want your questions too. Now, with the situation now in its sort of fifth week, we're going to be looking at how our children are coping and how they can continue to navigate the situation moving forward. And I'm joined today by Sema, who is the Chief Counsel for Cigna Healthcare Middle East and Africa, and her 12-year-old daughter, Flossie, who will be giving us their perspectives and asking questions of our expert today, who is super experienced. It's Mark Samways, who is the Director of Wellbeing, Schools and Organizations, and a counselling psychologist with the Free Spirit Collective in Dubai. And Mark has many, many years of working and helping and supporting young people. Right. If you are joining us live, remember you can ask questions of our experts and also of Flossie and of Sema for their perspectives. Just put your questions in the chat box and we will try our very, very best to prioritize them. We'll also be asking you to vote in our polls. If you're watching or listening on the catch up on the podcast channels or on YouTube, you won't be able to take part in the live interactivity. But if you want to be with us next time, please reach out to Cigna Healthcare for details of membership. Right. Well, let's kick off. Mark, I think this is a question which is true for all of us, whether we're young or slightly older. If I'm thinking I'm tired, I'm distracted, I'm on edge, I can't switch off, just open us up with an idea of what's going on inside our brains and our bodies when things feel uncertain, shall we say, for a long time.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to be with you. That feeling of uncertainty is unfortunately one that we're becoming a bit more familiar with at the moment, and it's a really natural response. I just want to kind of put that out there. I think that quite often when people are asking us questions like, "Is this normal? Is this okay? Is there anything wrong?" and I just really want to normalize it for everybody that it's okay. It's a very normal response. Ultimately, what's going on within us is our survival mechanism is kicking in, and we're looking to keep ourselves safe. So, in order to do that, we need to be ready to go almost. Hence, why we're maybe a little more on edge, a little more jumpy, yeah, it's just our bodies and our brains trying to keep us safe at this point.
Flossie, I'm going to tag you in here. What's your experience been? You know, again, we're talking about things like, but am I tired? Am I distracted? What have you noticed about how you or your friends have been responding to the situation?
Well, I think that certainly when you're homeschooling, it's a bit harder to make yourself, complete the work or to be more active or to take part in activities which you're not being forced to do. But it's quite important that you develop a sense of discipline when dealing with, taking responsibility for stuff during homeschooling and amid the current situation going on now. And it's certainly a lot more easy to feel tired or less motivated. But at the end of the day, you just have to pick yourself up and remember that it's all going to be okay.
We could almost finish the webinar there because that sounds like amazing advice. And you do seem very resilient talking about being disciplined. I think I need your discipline. Mark, I'll switch it back to you if I may. Flossie there talking about how it is harder to concentrate and how it is, more difficult to keep that focus. I think that's probably true of all of us. But from your work with younger people, how does that kind of show up? How hard is it for them to kind of maintain? Because as adults, we've got different responsibilities and we've got different things eating away at us. But what are young people's experiences of that?
It's incredibly difficult, and I think Flossie really hit the nail on the head, really, and that sense of trying to be disciplined. I think back to myself as a student, and that is probably the polar opposite of what would describe my education experience. It was a complete lack of discipline. And so to be in an environment essentially that you more associate with fun, you more associate with relaxation, you more associate with spending time with family or hanging out with friends, to then try and alter that environment to a productive working environment is actually really challenging,
Mm.
because inside your kind of brain's saying, no, this is not the space for this stuff. This, more serious and regulated, that school is, and school is a fantastic structure. And when we enter into the through that school gate, there's an expectation, right? We've got our routine, we've got we go and see our friends, we do our registration, we have a pastoral check-in maybe with our form tutor, and then we set to work. So there's a really useful structure and routine that we are used to, and that has just completely been taken away. And I'm fully supportive of the decision to go to online schooling, as nuts as my young boys are making me feel. But we've therefore lost that structure, and we miss that a lot because we rely on it as humans, not just young people, but as humans. So without that structure, we're now trying to formulate a new structure whereby we haven't really had that before, and that does take time.
Flossie, I'm going to come back to you. Sorry, Sema. I want to come back to Flossie just to kind of talk a little bit more about that, because what is that experience for you like? And I know we were going to ask a question a little later about missing your friends, but Mark's kind of really teed that up for us right now. But it is that sort of the opportunity for us to kind of switch into school mode as we do the commute to school, and then you walk through and you do the registration and see your friends and all that kind of thing, and you kind of get time to transition into school study mode. Now you're literally getting up and getting to work. How is that for you? Is it hard to kind of switch, or what's the hardest thing you think you're struggling with around not walking through those school gates and sitting down with your schoolmates?
I think definitely it's, there's a lack of structure,
Mm.
definitely more than there was when like you were getting up and going to school. And, I have to admit I slept through form times and everything, and I like failed to get up in time for some of my lessons. But um it's quite hard, I would say, to like just do the work, if that makes sense.
Get motivated.
Yeah, it's hard to get motivated and to like, because there's no external pressure really being put on you. And a lot of
Mhm.
children have working parents who are also trying to, get through their day and to do their work as well. So I think it's hard not just for kids, but for parents as well, to try and deal with the struggles with home learning.
On a regular day, you get up, you put on your school uniform, you do your breakfast, you cycle to school, and then you've got maybe half an hour to go to school mode before you and
Yeah.
your friends.
So it's not that like transition period between, waking up and starting a school day. It would just all merge together, and it's a bit harder to get into that makes sense.
I think many of us can resonate with that. I mean, right now, obviously I'm sort of doing this from home while my daughter is homeschooling, and my wife's a tutor as well. Sema, I wanted to ask your question because Flossie raised a really good point there, which was, as a parent, and I'd be incredibly proud of her first three answers there. But how is that experience for you? Like, what are you noticing? Because we all remember homeschooling from COVID days. And it is challenging, particularly when you've got a busy job. But what are you noticing, or what are you concerned about in this time that's not optimal for Flossie?
I'll talk about Flossie at one his age category, but I also have another child who's younger, and the experiences are very different. And I'm conscious it's probably even more different if your children are the foundation stage age. But at Flossie's age, she's in senior school, so the obligation is very much on the parent to self-start, to log into their lessons, and actually they can do those things. She can log into Teams and click on all the links that she needs to click on. And I had to say, partly because you can see she's a responsible adult, probably more so than I am. But she's doing all of those things herself, and while I'm checking that she's okay, she's got everything that she needs. The child is doing that, but it's very quiet. It's just a quiet room upstairs. She's got her headphones on. There's no kind of interaction. They can't. Maybe you guys are chatting within your sort of virtual classroom, but I feel like you're missing that big social element of the schooling. And it is quite sort of screen focused, which is everybody's nightmare all the time. You don't want kids to be on screens all day, every day, but that is what we are enforcing on them. And I also have a younger child who I, physically insists on as he, trying to do gymnastics in the back of all of his lessons. I had to log into each class for him, while I'm also on a video call and I'm trying to click on all of the links and make sure that he's doing those things. And, this one doesn't work. And the school are doing brilliantly. I'm really impressed with homeschooling in 2026 versus homeschooling in 2020. The difference is clear.
Yes.
Everything is kind of set up to go, and the children are much more device literate, I'd say. But it's still really hard. And the kids are struggling with it. And the motivation for a younger child who just wants to be acting and, messing around a bit and playing in school, that's all gone. And I think back to when you were in during COVID, you were 7 and Alex was 3, and he just played all day, and that's what a 3-year-old wants to be doing at school. So if they're having to sit down and do virtual lessons, I can't imagine how that's going to be able to right now.
My daughter's quite happy that I asked her not to do PE today, so she wasn't jumping up and down in the background of this podcast. Mark, and I know you've got a 4 and a 6-year-old, I think, haven't you? So I could see you smiling and resonating. What advice do you have for us in this situation? Because this is not easy to navigate, particularly, and it's different, isn't it? As Sema was saying, with younger children versus teenagers as well. So you need to adopt perhaps multiple strategies.
Yeah, I think it really does depend, your situation. I think I've taken quite a bit more of a relaxed view on the online learning. I mean, as you said, I've got FS2 and year 1, so it's not really the business end of school, particularly, and that's sort of the way that I'm approaching it. Is just trying to have fun with them. We will pick up bits and bobs in between, my wife and I working, and we'll do what we can, but ultimately that's all that we can do. And I feel in some ways in quite a privileged position to be able to do that, and quite a fortunate position. For some people, they really thrive online, and they do very, very well, and that's excellent. So it's really adjusting to how you're finding online, doing the best that you can, and recognizing that you're doing the best that you can. It's kind of that same approach that we take or try and take in every day. I think we consistently have very high expectations of ourselves, and it's one of the things that I think causes most emotional distress is these unrealistic high expectations, or expecting the same thing day in, day out. And it's just not possible as humans. And so, give yourself that space, that time, that freedom to show up better on some days. Know that you're doing your best. And I think there's that internal reflection I think that we can have, that you can say, am I giving it my all? Am I doing my best for today? And because I can't lie to me. I know the truth. Just trying to take the pressure off a little bit.
What's the advice then for young? Because and Flossie seems really sort of collected, and she could probably have. I think she has and can have that conversation with herself, and also cut herself some slack. But for your 6, your 7, your 8, even your 10-year-olds, what's the kind of advice around there? Do the teachers and the parents need to do that? How do we help them have that conversation when that's to me, seems quite a mature conversation to have? It's about self-awareness.
I think it's probably more about having that conversation with yourself as a parent at that point, because you'll then project that sense of anxiety onto the young person. And ultimately, for now, they will be okay. So it's giving yourself that reassurance and, having those conversations around, thinking about, I often look at it with young people through a character strength perspective and thinking about things like perseverance and teamwork and, emotional intelligence and these things, and introduce these ideas and say, what does this look like? And what does it look like in relation to school? And you're just really gently introducing these kind of topics and having conversations, not you need to sit down and you need to do this and you need to, because that is going to create a lot of tension and a lot of frustration from a parent perspective. So really looking at it, I like to use the kind of the strengths framework to identify what we think some of the strengths we might need in these times. And particularly, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, they're more than able to have these kind of conversations. And then, okay, what does that look like in a school environment? What might that mean today? What might that mean tomorrow? And what can we do? But really reassuring yourselves that it is okay. And, this is not going to long-term impact their road to university and things like that. We will be fine.
I could see you nodding as Mark was speaking there, Sema. How much of that resonated with you?
Yeah, massively so. And it's helpful for me to hear it actually, because I think I sometimes approach not with Flossie, but maybe with the other child. Hey, I have to make you do these things, but actually switching to a more sort of not value, but the strength-based point of view might help like other child and Flossie kind of pivot their approach to it a bit more. And yeah, you have bad days, you have good days, and leveling out at somewhere in the middle is probably okay. I was just thinking, you obviously are experiencing this now, so you have experienced homeschooling before at a younger age. And at that stage, are there things that you wish you could have said to me, or do you remember how you were feeling? Because I know you were missing your friends so much.
Yeah, I think it's not about schoolwork. Like at the end of the day, it's not about how hard it is, or like especially when you're younger. Like when I did homeschooling when I was under like 7, 8 years old, it wasn't about the schoolwork being hard or challenging. It was about missing out on that like social environment that you don't get to have enough with your friends.
Yeah, Mark, I want that if you may. I mean, we know at Mental we've talked about the impact of loneliness on anyone, whether they be adult or younger, and how that can actually be physically damaging to our health. And it's schoolwork and homeschooling and projects that are set on online platforms are tangible, but that absence of the friendships is almost like an intangible thing. But how important is it for us to remember, and what can we actually do to build in coping mechanisms for that? Because those friendships and those interactions are such a massive part of a young person's life.
They're so important. I mean, friendships are everything, and particularly at a younger age as well. And they're important in older and adult life. They never stop being important. But there's something about friendships in this adolescent period that is very much heightened. So, and we're in a slightly different position, aren't we? In terms of, we remember the dark days of COVID and the that distance learning, and that sort of at the time felt like it posed different risks. Whereas now whilst we're at a distance, we've got people as well that are, traveled a little bit more. And so we've got different time zones. We've got, then those that are here, we've got individuals with different sort of thresholds of what is okay and what's not okay. And different parents might see it differently. And, one might be absolutely fine for them to go down to the beach, and one may feel that crosses a line from them and they don't feel comfortable. And that's absolutely fine. Everybody is entitled to have their own threshold. And we must remember that everybody is coming at it from a position of care, from love, and wanting to do the right thing. So if we start with that as kind of a baseline, and then it's thinking, well, how can we connect? How can you connect with friends? If we were going to sort of think about the most important connections that you have, then, are they all online? Are some of them here? And are we able to kind of connect in an in-person and more meaningful way. So we kind of map that out, and so it's named, because I think that's helpful, just to name it in itself, that actually my three best friends are all in England, and I'm feeling a little bit left out, that they're there and maybe they're able to meet up and we're not, and that will bring its own kind of feelings. But then, okay, how can we connect, whether it's watching the film together? I remember that on the online days when you could co-watch a film on Netflix and things like that. And that's really nice. And I know for me, when we're working so much online, the last thing I really want to do is jump on another online call with like the family or something else. And hopefully they don't take that too personally. But one of the things I like a lot about my job is the fact that it's a lot in person and with people. And so I really struggle with a lot of virtual. And then it's okay, if my friendships have been removed, then where else can I connect? What else is important to me in connection? Because we can connect to many different things as well. And just trying to have those moments of connection, connecting as a family as well, if that's possible. But really, being as flexible as we can to connect with friends, if that is possible, connecting virtually if we can, and to share the film, to have a conversation, whatever else it might be. We might be a bit more flexible on bedtime because of different time zones. There's lots of things that we can do, but then thinking, okay, how can we connect a little bit as a family? What is it that we can do that's in our comfort zone to ensure that there is some level of connection that is happening? It's not going to be potentially what it was and what we loved through walking through those gates at school, but we're trying to take care of it, and most importantly, we're naming it as something that we might be struggling with at this point.
Right, it's time for some audience interaction. We want you to vote in this poll, particularly if you're a younger person. We'd like to know your views, but also for adults, for all of us. Our first poll is going to ask about what has been hardest lately. And there are a bunch of options for us: sleeping or switching off at night, concentrating on schoolwork or work, feeling jumpy or on edge. And Alison's asked a question. Alison will get to that after the poll as well. Worrying a lot or overthinking, feeling irritable or snapping at people, feeling tired and flat, or I'm not sure. I know the temptation would be to say all of the above, but please focus on which do you think is the hardest amongst those for you lately. So then we can perhaps tailor Mark's. We'll get some advice from Mark around those points. Mark, for the people who are coming to see you or talking to you, what is standing out from those options? What are you seeing perhaps more?
For me, what I'm seeing is this lack of a lack of certainty, and also around decision making. So there's kind of two aspects, because I work both with adolescents and adults as well. So
Yeah.
from an adult point of view, I think a lot of the questions or a lot of the conversations we're having is, how do I make the best possible decision for us as a family, and sort of the weight of that to make the right calls at the right time, to do the right thing, and to kind of lead the family almost. And what does that look like? When might I make different decisions? So there's a lot of I think a lot of pressure felt in trying to do the right thing without necessarily feeling like they've got enough. I don't know whether it's evidence or data or knowledge, because I don't know either, frankly, to try and make that kind of that call and that decision. For young people, I would say it's more around the lack of like certainty, and when is this going to change? When am I going to be able to go back in school? Will my friends all come back? Will it be the same? Will this go on for a long time? There's lots of, again, similar but questions in the unknown, really. And uncertainty is such a difficult thing for us to sit with as human beings. not just from a young person perspective, from an adult perspective. None of us particularly enjoy uncertainty that much. We like our structure, we like our routine, we like our knowns. So that brings up, feelings of sort of helplessness, and hopelessness at times. And I think they can be really challenging emotions for us to sit with and to try and just be with and not sort of get rid of and feel frustrated with. And I just need to know. I just want to know the answer. So those are the two things that are really coming up most.
I think let's reveal the results of the poll. Yeah, sleep is a big one. Sleep or switching off at night, worrying a lot and overthinking, which I think is really, really understandable. Yeah, so worrying and overthinking, that's a really good one. And a couple of the questions that have come in. So we've got Alison, who was talking about, so she's in a kind of really nervous state because obviously we have a lot of noises that we're not used to hearing, including, whether it be the alerts that are there to keep us safe, or indeed the sounds of interception, which are also there to keep us safe. And another good question as well, good one from Peter saying, how can you reboot to come back to feeling excited about the day? Because he's often losing sleep at 3 a.m. and then struggling through the day. So they're both talking about some of those things in there: sleep or switching off, and worrying and overthinking. Um, let's talk about the worrying and overthinking first, because we are experiencing a lot of external factors, external noises, external headlines that we're just so not used to seeing. What's happening to our nervous systems in this space, and what can we do about that? What can we do about the overthinking?
It's a real tricky sort of component of our psyche almost. And again, we're looking for answers. So in uncertainty, we are scrambling in our mind looking for answers. And so the mind is in overdrive saying, well, what about this? What about that? Why don't you read that? Why don't you pick up your phone? Because if you scroll again, you might find another article that will give you more information than you knew, if you didn't scroll. And there's this like constant panic and worry that I'm missing the right piece of information. And then, as helpful as some of the WhatsApp groups are, there's a bombardment of information. And I know on the community one that I'm on, they're like, did anybody else hear that? Did you hear that? And I'm just like, whoa, it's construction, and this is happening. And it's, again, it's really, really hard. So when we've got to go back to basics. And it sounds frustrating because ultimately we just want a trick or a tool that's going to switch this off. And I know when I'm in this position, as I often can be, and just because I find myself talking about it in sessions and saying, Mark, you should really listen to that because you're not doing that at all. So I'm not preaching from any form of pedestal at this point, but I know when I'm not doing so well, I'm probably consuming a little bit too much than sort of trying to get a bit more knowledge. I had a moment yesterday where I opened the dishwasher and I pulled out 7 cups, and I'd had at least 7 cups of tea yesterday. And I think yesterday was really challenging, but equally, I do love my tea, as you saw before when I was having a huge cup, but that's, quite a lot of caffeine for me to consume. And again, that's a stimulant. And so I'm therefore, going to be a little bit more on edge, a little bit more nervous. And so really thinking about, what caffeine levels that I'm taking in, being really conscious of how we are being. And look, when we are worrying and overthinking, all we can try and do is recognize that I'm in this worry and I'm in this overthinking. And just honestly, I talk to myself and I look really strange. I'm probably walking around spinnies. So if you have seen me in spinnies talking to myself, I haven't quite gone too nuts, but I'm like, Mark, it's okay. Listen, this is your anxious side talking to you. It's trying to keep you safe, but the noises that you are hearing is this. This is, they are keeping you safe. This is what is going on. And I give myself a real firm talking to. And it's like, that's calming me down, because the anxious side in me is like, okay, I'm protected. I'm looked after. And engage with it. And what people struggle with sometimes is they get very judgmental of their anxious side. And they're like, oh, why are you here? Why don't you just go away? I just want to take my head off and throw it away, And it's like, the last thing anxiety needs is shame and judgment. Anxiety actually needs love and compassion. And if we can try and adopt that a little bit more with some of the basics, and thinking about what we consume, when we consume it, and knowing that these times will pass, and not just, in the wider sense, but, this anxious moment will pass, and we will be feeling something else very shortly, and we will move on to the next thing that's happening in life, from a day-to-day point. So there's lots of little things that we can do that all come together to provide us with better well-being.
Flossie, from that poll, what have you been struggling lately with? Is it sleep? Is it concentrating on schoolwork, feeling jumpy, worrying, or that overthinking? Are you talking to yourself in spinnies like Mark?
I don't know if I'm talking to myself in spinny, but maybe in couple. But overthinking and trying to switch off at night is definitely a big problem for me, because I certainly find myself going to bed at like later times than I would like normally in a normal school week environment. But I think it's because there's no pressure. I just get up in the morning and I just have to go to the next room and sit on my laptop. So I think waking up in the morning means waking up in the morning to like an environment where you're not being pressured to put in as much work means that you go to bed later at night and you feel like you over procrastinate during the day.
I mean, I would agree with that, but I think you're very beautifully linking that to your schoolwork. I feel like no, but I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I feel like I'm also going to bed much later. But that's me sort of mulling over things, and as you said, scrolling every WhatsApp group to find that magic information, or just worrying or reading every single news alert on all the newspaper apps that I'm connected to. And I think hopefully that isn't something that you're doing, but it's definitely
a lot of like children like I'm guessing, because we can obviously hear these like loud news noises that are keeping us safe, but like at night like a lot of thoughts are played, and it can be quite embarrassing sometimes to tell someone that you're scared, because you see how other people your age, like your peers, are dealing with it, and that you think, oh, they're not blah blah shy. You never really know what someone's going through inside.
There's a great question that Paola's asked, but I want to come to you, Mark, about what Flossie was saying there about, being embarrassed. And you were saying there that anxiety doesn't need shame. Anxiety needs love and compassion. But I think it's difficult for all of us at any age, but particularly in in that kind of adolescence, admitting to embarrassment and reaching out for help can be really tricky. What's the way for people of Flossie's age to be able to kind of work through that and actually get the reassurance that they need?
Yeah, it's a great question in terms, again, thinking about that, the importance of connection. And we also have a very deep desire to belong and be in groups. And the last thing that we want to do is to be on the out group. And so again, Frosty's absolutely, again, hit the nail on the head. And I feel a little bit redundant here, to be honest. But it's that drive to remain as part of the group will outweigh the kind of fear that we're experiencing. And so we will often put our needs second behind the desire to stay and to belong as part of the group, which will mean not sharing that we're scared. And again, that comes from our very internal system that we are creatures of connection. We need to be in groups. But there's a couple of things and I'm thinking look, I would say from a slightly older and adult perspective, that vulnerability breeds vulnerability, as Brené Brown would say. But as a younger, teenager, or being on the cusp of teenage, I never ever would have done that. So I know that. So it's okay. Where is it that is safe for me? And let's not forget, there's still the pastoral systems that are in place in school. It may be that you have a trusted adult within the school, and it might be the counselor, it might be your form tutor, it might be your history teacher, or it might be a parent. But all I would say is that it is important to share it somewhere if we can, and that's where we, as the pastoral system in school is going on, and as parents, it's just having those check-ins of, how are you feeling? I'm feeling a bit scared. Um,
Mm.
for my younger ones who've just burst through the door, so I don't know whether you've heard that, but they're, creating considerable noise. But for them, I'm having different conversations because I'm not necessarily being as, I guess, honest in those moments, but sort of just normalizing it and saying, "You haven't feeling this. Yeah, sometimes Daddy feels scared. Sometimes Daddy gets that." Or, but for the older ones, it's like we can own it. We don't have to be superheroes as parents all
Mm.
the time. Actually, showing that vulnerable side of us is just as important as trying to show that grounded side where we can, and reassure and provide, that sort of parental figure. But to show that vulnerable side is also a really powerful thing for us to do, and just say, do you know what? I've had a bit of a difficult day today. I've found that really, really hard. It's amazing what that will do. But from a young person perspective, yeah, if we can find somebody somewhere that we can have that conversation with, it'll be super, super helpful.
That really connects to the question that Paola was asking. Paola joining us from Kuwait, saying, I'm not sure if you'd addressed this already, but for many, as this is an ongoing issue, how do parents explain what's happening without causing fear or anxiety? And that is, I totally resonate with that, because you have this innate desire to seem really strong for your children. And therefore, as you say, not being as honest. But what approach? Yeah, and again, Anna's just jumped in as well. Mark, how did you approach explaining the situation specifically? The noises that we're hearing to kids of 4 to 6 years old, because they're going to be curious.
Yeah, they are. And trying to think about what is an age appropriate conversation is a really, there's no manual on this, first and foremost. So we're all flying by the hoof a little bit and thinking about how we manage it. So let's, give ourselves that kind of, that space as well. The way that I've been managing it with my two guys is just talking about it from a sense of like boons. These are noises in the sky. There are things going on. Sometimes there are these alerts, and that means that we all come together as a family and turning it into a bit of a game.
Mm.
But last one to find, mummy or daddy, whatever, and really just kind of, yeah, making it a bit more fun, whilst trying not to panic a little bit. So we've not gone into too much kind of detail, but then they'll go to the park or they'll see their friends, and other parents have understandably handled it very differently, and then they've had different conversations. So then it's readdressing some of those conversations or things that they've heard, or they hear the news on in the background and they're like, what's that? So for me, it's trying to be as honest as I can with a filter through age, and just thinking I'm trying to do the best that I can, and I'll answer the questions that I can. And that's the way that I've been handling it. I don't know whether that's the right way, but that's the way that we've been doing it.
Well, Sema, you've obviously, Flossie's there, she's 12, and sort of very intelligent, smart, switched on to what's happening around. But then obviously there's her younger brother. So you'll be handling those conversations at 2 different age brackets. How have
Yeah.
you found that?
Pretty difficult. And as you've mentioned, it really depends also what they're hearing from their friends, because, one really good intention to say, you should sort of make it a not scary as possible. Sometimes my son comes over and, he's had a conversation in the park and there's some really terrible things when he gets home. So trying to reassure him that actually everything is okay. The sounds that you're hearing, as I say, are things keeping us safe. We have a very different personal sort of family dynamics as well, because our family is half in Lebanon. So very terrible there all the time. So that is very real. And the experience is split across multiple different places. But it has been, for the most part, a fairly sort of consistent message of, yes, these sound, we do have to explain them. I found it's a moving feast, if that makes sense, because we just need to keep adapting to what new nuggets come in every day.
I'm going to ask, and we're trying to turn towards some practical tools, because I can't believe how fast the time is going on this conversation. I think it's a really powerful conversation. Poll number 2, and Flossie, I'm going to ask you this as well, but poll number 2 is, what would help you most right now, whether you're a younger person or indeed an adult on the call? Would the options be a way to sleep better, a way to stop overthinking, a way to calm down fast, help with school focus, and if you're an adult, we could say work focus, what to do when adults are stressed, or how to help a friend without getting stressed too? What, Flossie, while other people are voting on the call, and please get your votes in, what do you think would help you the most in that thing? What's the one thing that you'd like to tackle if you could?
I think the one thing that I'd like to, be able to do is how to help a friend without getting stressed too, because obviously we live in a very there are
Obviously, cultural, but you're also connected in multiple different ways, right?
Yeah. There are here in Dubai, there are lots of people from lots of different countries, with lots of different experiences with family going on right now. So when you your friend and you open up, which is obviously a very good thing to do to help deal with stress, it, you just have to make sure sometimes to not put stress on yourself as well, because ultimately it's out of your control. That the best thing you can do is to help your friend who's going through something as well.
That's interesting. I'm going to ask if we can reveal the results of the poll, but so Mark, what would your advice be around that? The I mean, overthinking, one of the top results, a way to stop thinking, but how to help a friend without getting too stressed, and that connects to something that Ajaz has asked. And Ajaz, thanks for the question. I will ask that in a moment. But yeah, just for example, give us a way to stop overthinking, because that seems to resonate with a lot of people on the call. But also, let's answer Flossie's question there as well, because that is interesting. How do we help a friend or indeed a colleague without ourselves getting stressed too? And I perhaps know that as a parent, you're trying to look after everybody else, and you don't sometimes realize just how much you might be struggling because you don't fit that oxygen mask first.
Yeah. So in terms of supporting others, there's a couple of things really, in that we're all going to have different responses. The fight, flight, freeze, and that's a part of our biology. For some of us, we will go into I'm going to be the strong one. I'm going to be the one that consistently shows up. And this will happen in friendships too, right? So I'm going to be there. I'm going to check in with everybody. It might be because you're a parent. It might be because you're a manager. It might be because that's the role that you play in the friendship group, right? You're the slightly more empathetic one, and you're the person that people turn to in the friendship group. And so we kind of take on this personality of the strong one. And it's a wonderful trait to have, but you've got to be really careful about it, because like any strength, and we were talking about strengths earlier, they stop being strengths when we overutilize them. So when we overutilize our strength of emotional intelligence or empathy, for example, we get empathy fatigue. And so we actually then we then go into more sympathy mode, or we get quite frustrated, or we get quite angry, and our answers stop reflecting us as an individual because we've overutilized that strength so much. And that's why we've got to protect ourselves to enable us to stay in that strength zone of empathy and care, and to be able to, supporting other people is emotionally very draining. It's a privilege. It's a great honor. I've always said that about working as a psychologist. My job is one of the most privileged positions, and I feel immensely grateful to anybody that goes to therapy. But equally, to hold that honor and to hold that privilege, I have to be in a good position. So I have to look after myself. And there are days where that looks better than others. And again, it's recognizing that. And we think about the components of resiliency, for example. A huge chunk of resiliency is actually about self-awareness and self-regulation. They're the first two components of resiliency. And so we've got to check in with ourselves. How am I feeling? And then am I able to regulate it? Yesterday, I was feeling quite dysregulated, and I had to kind of step back and say, I probably can't ring my friend at the moment and check in, because I'm not really going to have a very good ear at this point. And so, like the adage, when we do fly, and putting your oxygen mask on first before doing and helping another person, it's the same rules that apply. So it does not make you less of a friend if you're not always there, because I think that's the narrative that will play in our mind, and the anxious narrative that is, unless I show up for my friends every single day, I'm not a good friend. And it's giving yourself the permission to take some time for you, because that means you're staying in the strength zone. And that's the most important thing, because that's the biggest reflection of you. So that's what I would say in terms of supporting others, is being really mindful of your battery and your fuel tank, and refilling it as often as you can. When it comes to overthinking, and if I can switch into the second part, so it's what we pay attention to. So when we are overthinking, all we are paying attention to is that anxious thought that's whirring, going around in our head all the time. So what we need to do to try and step out of that anxious sort of overthinking is to change the focus. And you've probably seen these videos online, right? When they say, right, can you name the 3 things that are in yellow in this video? And then they say, but what was the blue thing? And we're like, what blue thing? There wasn't a blue thing, because that's where our attention was. And so if we can then, okay, I'm going to try and switch my attention. And honestly, this is where things like cycling are really helpful, because you have to pay attention to cycling, because if you don't, you're going to fall off. And that's quite a horrible position to be in. Now, we can't always go cycling, but it's like, okay, why don't you do some juggling? Get some things around the house, and balls, whatever else it might be, and just start doing things with your hands. If you've got like a little table tennis bat and ball, bounce that up and down, because you have to focus. This is why I love Lego, because it makes me focus, because then when I get it wrong, I have to go back 3 pages and undo what I've done to then go forward again. So it's doing these little micro activities, whatever it might be, to turn your focus, to turn your attention away. Again, not going into that shame and judgment of, why am I overthinking? I can't stop thinking about it, because the more I keep thinking about it, it's just keep going around in my head, and then it's keep happening. So it's like, okay, I've recognized it, like the old school typewriter. I've recognized it. Let me bring myself back to the present. Let me do something else. Do something with my hands. Do something that I have to concentrate on. Step away from the computer. Step away from your phone. Whatever it might be, and then do something. Listen to some music. Sing. Run cold water on your hands. Anything that is going to distract yourself away from that. Give yourself a minute, and you'll be amazed at the differences in between where you were and then where you are after a minute.
I love that. And it's also a way for me to now convince my wife that I can spend money on Lego Star Wars. I'm going to try and bring in a couple of audience questions, because we've only got like 4 minutes or so left. Ijaz, I said I'd ask you a question. He wrote, I find myself being more aggressive than usual. And we talked about that earlier, irritability being one of the things when I respond to my children or my partner, for that matter. I feel I blame anxiety and sleeplessness. what's the advice do you have for people like me to reduce strain on relationships? Which I think that's a really important question, because even in the most loving of households, we're all human beings, and I'm sure each of us may have snapped at a child or a partner, or a brother or a sister, whether they be older or younger, at any point.
Absolutely. Um, this is a really common issue, and sort of a reflection that I have in therapy as well. I too am in this camp. This would be my go-to emotion, would be anger. Um, and I think for me, it's understanding where that anger is coming from. And if I speak for myself, so I get angry because I'm feeling out of control and that I'm not able to protect people. I feel like as a father, one of my roles is to protect. I feel like my ability to protect is perhaps being questioned, or not maybe questioned, but almost like it feels like it's been diminished. I don't like a challenge, thank you. And so I don't like that. So I'm feeling out of control, and my response to that lack of control is anger. So it's understanding that these emotions are energy, emotion. So what is this energy trying to tell you? What is it that the message is saying? Because for me, it's you're not good enough, right? You're letting your kids down. We had an instant a few weeks ago where my youngest one was just messing around on the seat and he just fell off backwards, and I got really angry, and then I was like, why did you do that? And it's the last thing he needed, the last thing. And it was a real parenting fail. And it was, why did I get so angry? Because I felt like I didn't protect him, because I felt like I didn't look after him. And I felt like that was what was underneath it. I was annoyed with him for messing around on the chair. I was scared that he'd hurt himself, and I'm scared that I'd let him down. So try and understand the function of the anger.
That is really powerful, and I really, really resonate with that. I'm going to bring in one last question from Assem, because I think this is a good way to bring the conversation to the close. And I am going to come back to you, Sema and Flossie, as well, for your final thoughts in a moment. Tips to help kids and teenagers establish routines to help them sleep early and properly, and how can parents help that in that respect?
Look, sleep is all about routine, right? Yeah. And again, being flexible in this time, but ultimately that's where our parenting pants come on, and it's like, right, this has got to stop now. We're like, this is the cutoff point. This is where we're going to trying to get them into that routine, building that discipline, as Flossie was saying, as best you can. If you can't get off your device, they come out of your room. You don't need to be in there. All the things that we would normally do, as best we can. But having that conversation with them as well, saying, look, I really need your support in helping me do this. How can we work on this together? Let's work at it collectively rather than combatively, and everyone will have a better experience.
Flossie, I'm going to come to you, if I may, for your final thoughts. What from what we've talked about today do you feel has been helpful for you or for your friends?
I feel like the conversations on overthinking will be really helpful to me, because I know definitely, like, I've been overthinking a lot in the past few days, and that my friends have definitely been overthinking as well. Um, and I think just realizing that it's not a bad thing to overthink, and that you need to, have trust in yourself and people around you, it's gonna take you a long way in feeling more calm and secure and safe.
See, I feel like I've set you up there, Sema, because that's such a mic drop moment. You've got to follow that with your final thought.
I know, this is so unfair. No, I mean, I pick you up on that. I think being able to recognize what's going on, if you recognize that you are overthinking, or recognize, as Mark said, the moment that you react really strangely to, for example, an accident that your child had, just thinking, okay, this is an external stress. There's a lot going on here. I just need to figure out what I'm feeling and approach this in a slightly different way, and being a bit kind to yourself about everything that's going on. So I think vulnerability, kindness to yourself, and sort of feeling that we need to make things as normal as possible. And going back to the sleep point, so much time on screen and no physical outlets, the kid is
is a really, really hard thing. So we're taking, a couple of walks around the block before bedtime.
Perfect. And I love what Mark said earlier about vulnerability, breeding vulnerability, quoting the great vet Brené Brown. Sadly, that is all of the time that we have today. Thank you, Mark. I think that's been an amazing session. Some great advice there. Sema, Flossie, you are much better at this job than I am. So that's my imposter syndrome kicked right in. Thank you very much for joining us today. You've both been brilliant. And to everybody who's been so engaged, once again, you will be asked for feedback when this session closed. Thank you very much for joining us on this special edition of Connect for Health. It will be available soon as well as a podcast to download and on YouTube. I will see you very soon for the next edition. Thank you very much.